first slide, introduction, family therapy theory comparison. So comparing 3 family therapy models. This is going to include the Boehnian family systems theory, which is more of a focus on differentiation. This is going to also include SFBT, which is very future oriented. This is also going to have narrative therapy that has the life story reconstruction, where we try to have them tell a story and try to construct it for something new. Now, why do we compare? Why does it matter to compare these different therapy modalities? And it's because it expands the clinical toolkit flexibility. So the more modalities that a person has, the more flexible they are in the tools that they can apply. So if I can mix and match a mosaic of the different types of styles in the different cases, some might be better in some cases while others might be better in others. And there's better matching between case and modality. So some cases might prefer one modality over others, or some cases might need a little bit of everything. I don't know why I'm getting out of focus for some reason in the camera. But next up is, it also strengthens conceptual awareness. So it allows me to be able to understand more about the therapy modalities by comparing them, like what are some pros and cons, or what are some differences on how these might treat the same exact problem. It's like we have the same problem, but these modalities provide many different perspectives on how to deal with it, especially in their interventions, the methods, and how they perceive the change is going to be in the dynamic that comes along. So next up, we have the Boehnian family systems theory. Now, this is a lot of the DOS, or differentiation of self. And so this is when fundamentally we're trying to separate a person emotionally from others, even though they are connected to others, which means we're trying to make sure that they can be their own person. And then triangulation is another foundational concept, in that people might communicate with others when others are there. So they can't really have a one-to-one interaction. They have to negotiate when there's others that are kind of codependently involved. And so it stabilizes their anxiety when they have other people that have to be there. But it disrupts their ability to differentiate themselves, because it forces others to be a part of their interpersonal communication. So it kind of disrupts that dyad from happening. Next up is multi-generational transmission, which this is maladaptive emotional patterns. They continue generationally. So like the mother and father might have an issue that they got from their parents, and that passes along, and they all don't know really how to deal with it. And then it sometimes gets worse. Hopefully not, but sometimes it gets worse in the kids because the parents couldn't figure it out either. And then emotional reactivity, where them fusing with each other too much prevents them from really dealing with things. They react too much because they're copying each other's emotions. And sometimes I think what happens is that when they don't portray the same emotions that others they fused with have, they might perceive it as disloyalty, like, how dare this person not feel how I expect them to feel? And so that creates more anxiety in the relationship. Moving along, there's a lot to cover. The next up is the foundational concept summarization of SFBT. Now, SFBT is future-focused outlook. So it's all about centering ourselves on where we want to go and not where we've been. I mean, it does matter where we've been, but it's less trying to get into the psyche and more of just like, it's almost very similar to behavioral therapy. It's like, what are the behaviors we're doing? But it's also more about trying to find exceptions, trying to notice when a problem is weaker or absent, try to repeat conditions. I'll cover this later, but there's a miracle method where they try to figure out what's the best case solution in the future, and let's try to produce that. It's very surface level, which might be helpful for some, but others might want something that's more substance and more abstract. So this is very good for very concrete thinkers when it's not that deep. Also, there's incremental steps. So even though there's low-hanging fruit, the low-hanging fruit might lead to rapid improvement and momentum. So just because it's like, oh, this helped me 1% today, well, that 1% can then lead to more percentages as time goes on. Moving on to narrative therapy foundations. So for narrative therapy, there's what's called problem externalization. So they try to separate the problem from the person as outside influences. So they try to go, okay, they're not this person. That this person isn't the problem. The problem is impacting us, and we got to fight against it as if the problem is a different entity. So it's like, I'm not my problem. I'm trying to fight my problem. So it shifts the whole narrative. Now also, it's trying to get preferred stories because everybody kind of tells themselves the story that they're living in their life, and sometimes that gets out of whack and it disrupts them and gets anxiety. And so we try to figure out what story do they prefer they live, and then we try to get them out of their problem saturated stories and more into the identity that they would prefer. Also, it's very collaborative, so I might adopt more of a non-expert position, which is a pro and a con, because if I'm a non-expert position, the client might not really think I'm an expert. They might be like, why is this person only using very non-professional language with me? Well, that's because I'm honoring the client's language. So if I'm doing narrative therapy and my client is starting to make him a new language, like, oh, I'm calling my problem the laziness demon, right? Well, I'm now going to call their problem the laziness demon, even though that doesn't really sound that professional. At least I'm honoring their own language, because everybody speaks their own type of English. Even though it's English, it's the client's version of how they learned and how they speak to themselves, and I try to speak to them at their level. All right, I got to move along. So next up is interventions. So with Bowenian family systems theory, we have the genogram analysis. So this has to deal with interventions by trying to map out exact emotional patterns that they have multigenerationally. So we'd have a map of, okay, this is the dad. Is he detached? Is he fused? Is he conflicting with other people around him in the constellation of the family? And so that kind of helps create a map, a clearer picture of the issues, and reflect it onto my client and show them, hey, this is what it looks like, and so they can more visualize it, make it more concrete. I mean, I can explain it to them, but seeing it on paper might be helpful. And next is the I positioning statement coaching, where I'm trying to promote their self-definition. So sometimes they'll say you language, like projection. They'll say you this, you that, you this. And I tell them, hey, they have to own their feelings. Say, I feel this. I don't like this. I hate this, right? That genuine idea that some people can't say they hate things, but they still hate things. So they might pretend they don't hate something because they want to virtue signal, but I try to help them be less phony, which is gestalt, but this is more of trying to help them own their emotions as a differentiation that they're not someone else's emotions, and that instead of telling others how they're supposed to feel, they say what they feel, and they try to convince others to feel the same if the other person agrees, or if they can persuade or convince the other person through negotiation. And also, this reduces the fusion reactivity because it's less fusing by caring more about the subject of the sentence instead of just saying everybody's you, everybody's me, we're all the same. This is like, no, I'm me, I'm different, and I'm differentiated. Okay, next is the non-anxious presence. So sometimes I may be anxious, but that's something I got to work on myself. I have to work on that. And that I have to model this, and I have to make sure that I have to differentiate myself from my client. So if I hear the client saying something, I differentiate myself from them, and I don't do incorrect you language telling them what to do, like, well, you just got to do this and that and this and that. Well, I can't just say you do this and you do that. I have to lead with reason and provide options, and change somewhat comes from making it seem like it's their idea, not my idea. They're not really going to want to do my ideas. They're going to want to do their idea. So I have to make it seem like it's their idea. It's a I gotta move on because I don't want to take too much time here. Next up is interventions for SFBT. So this is miracle questions, as I discussed before, where we're trying to visualize thinking, if tomorrow was the miracle day, I got everything I wanted. What is that? Let's get some actionable steps to get there. And so it's like, okay, if tomorrow was a little bit closer to the miracle, what would the morning look like? What would I eat? What would I say to my partner? What would I say to my kid? What questions would I ask them? How would that look like? And then we try to get there, document it, and then do scaling questions. Like, am I getting closer each day? Or am I getting further away? And so we try to quantify the plan, the perceptions, the perspectives, the priorities, going, okay, how big of a priority is this? Is this the miracle they really wanted, or is there another miracle that they hope to get? So scaling helps us quantify exactly how we're going along in the process. If we're getting better or we're getting worse according to the baseline. Next up is compliments, because when they do well, we want to let them know. Well, at least according to themselves. So if they're saying, hey, when I do it this way, it's doing very well, I say, great, keep going, right? So if they're telling me that they're doing something that's going well, I validate them and say, wow, does this seem like they want to do this more? And they might want to do it more. And so it's reinforcing their competence. It's trying to reinforce their solution strategies. It's trying to help them build momentum. So when they're saying, actually, I went from an 8 to a 9, or I went from a 6 to a 7, I'll say, that sounds like an improvement, right? So I'm trying to compliment it, like, that's a good job that they were able to improve that number. The next up is the interventions for narrative therapy theory. So this is a little different than these other therapy styles, because this has to deal with trying to help my client thicken their descriptions. Because sometimes they just say, oh, this is all bad. This is not good. I don't like this. And that's not very descriptive. So we try to have them, okay, tell me more about that. Can you go further into this? Because we're trying to have them reduce their black and white thinking. Life is a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of anti-heroes, and that's just villains and heroes. There's more of a more nuance that sometimes we're giving a plate of good and bad things, and we have to overcome, even though there are some bad things in the world that changes us. So the next thing is the story reauthoring, where sometimes there's some bad things in the past, and it's a post-problem, we have to reconstruct it and try to reframe it to have more of a strength narrative, a more preferred strength narrative, like what narrative can give them hope as a hero, that they're the hero in their story. They are the ones that are improving their own lives. They're the ones that are going to make the difference. So trying to help inspire them hope, helping them write their story, reauthoring it rather than having the problem saturation, try to have hope saturation, try to be like, they're the ones that are Neo in the Matrix. And the next up is remembering relationships, which is different from remembering because it has that hyphen there where it's rebuilding their supportive community of members, where we're either downgrading or upgrading the people in the client's life, where it's like, is this person no good? Gotta prune them. This person's is good or better for them. Now, also, we don't want to do black and white thinking for people in our life. We don't want to split hairs with people. We don't want to make it seem like, oh, this person did one bad thing, so all of it's bad. It's like, well, let's just not completely cut them off, but let's downgrade them a little bit. Maybe we'll only hang out with them once a year or twice a year during the holidays, and less of all the time when it's not really supportive or conducive to their story they're trying to build for themselves and their life in their community. That was a lot. I really like this theory because that's why I study a lot. I read his book. Anyway, next up is change and problem resolution for Brownian family systems theory. So, how does this theory bring about change? Well, it improves boundaries because it develops less emotional reactivity. People will react less to each other. People will have increased differentiation. They'll be able to be their own person. They'll have a strengthened sense of self where they're like, I'm me, I'm not my dad, I'm not my mom. Less of the sins of the father or sins of the mother. It's more of I'm my own person. I don't have to be held down, crabs in the bucket situation in some cases. Also, there's stronger family dynamic awareness. So they gain awareness of their generational patterns with that genogram situation where they go, okay, hold on a second. I'm getting aware that this is a pattern of where I'm detached here and oh, look, I'm fused. So I'm trying to, instead of trying to understand other people, I'm just copying their emotions and I'm not being myself that's separate from their emotions. And so that creates more of a healthier connection in their autonomy where they're not doing things because other people feel that way or other think that way or have told them to do that way. They're like, I'm doing it because for me. Which the contraindication for this is cultural situations where sometimes that collectivism is what they're brought up in and it'd be disrespectful and dishonorable to how they're raised and their lifestyle and their worldview. So we want to make sure that this is appropriate to the case that I'm dealing with. It also helps stabilize family systems because it helps go, okay, they're more differentiated, less emotional reactivity, so they're more stabilized. And that helps change and resolves the problem. Next up is solution-focused brief therapies problem and change resolutions. So we have the focus strength activation, where it's going to help them pinpoint and amplify meaningful strengths. So they're going to track their progress escalation. They're going to put numbers on things. They're going to be able to demonstrate improvements by saying, number go bigger, number go up, number going down. Uh-oh. And so this is less deep and more surface level, but there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can produce quick results for the clients, and they will be inspired as the solution talk reshapes action, because when they start to talk more solutions away from the problems, they can then focus their mind on their options and less on a complaint, right? Because we can always, like, it's more difficult to think of something we can do than it is to complain about the past. Complaining, we can complain about anything, but the real problem is trying to figure out how to overcome the complaint and think about what can I do about to help get the miracle happen tomorrow. Okay, next up is narrative therapy. So this is the last therapy I'm comparing for the change in problem resolution. So that what narrative therapy does is it strengthens their preferred story. So if their preferred story is them, they are the hero of their own story. They're the ones that are Neo in the Matrix. They're the ones that are going to make the difference. And so it's going to be where new behaviors align with clients' valued narratives. So as their behaviors start to align with the story they tell themselves, they'll become that. In the same way, if they tell themselves they'll never be great, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If they tell themselves, I'm going to be doing great things, if they look in the mirror and they say, I'm going to be different today. I'm going to make the change. I'm going to be the difference. I'm not going to fall in the same trap. I'm going to trick myself to be better. Like having this narrative to try to sequence them past these problems in their life, and it intentionally re-authors themselves. And so it's more abstract, more subjective, and less concrete as the SFBT, but it can help reduce all the problem stories by getting them more into telling their hero stories. And like, so, okay, sometimes the hero gets hit, right? And it's not about us just being able to throw hits, it's us being able to take a hit and stand back up and keep going. I mean, it's like the Rocky meme, right? All right, so the next step is separated from the problem. So mainly people will start conjoining with the problem where they get entrenched into their problem, and they go, "Oh, I'm the problem, and woe is me, and that's me, that's who I am." Well, we got to detach them from that belief so they can overcome that that's who they are as a person, where it reduces their shame, where it's like, no, they're not the problem. The problem's attacking them, and they're an agent of being able to fix that. So it increases their agency, and it improves their intentionality. About 22 minutes, okay? Next up is the clinical case example. So for this, I have a parental conflict with son. And so Mother Deborah, she's overly involved with her son, and she hovers over him. She's anxious. She raises her voice. She was raised with a perfectionist and critical mother. The father, George, is avoidant, quiet, leaves the room during escalation, retreats to not make things worse, feels burnt out. He is raised to avoid conflicts. The son, Matthew, who's 10 years old, he's oversensitive and a disaster, and that's described by both the parents. He clings to the mother until she escalates, and then when she escalates, he just starts crying until he falls asleep. And then he generally cries during homework time, and he claims it's too hard or that I'm tired. And this repeats around 4 to 5 times per week between around 5 and 6 p.m. So that's the case that I'm going to apply these theories to. So Deborah and Matthew, they are forming a reactive dyad. It's like a triangle situation where every time there's a problem, they both kind of sync up, where the dad can't really get in there without the mother and the son just like going at it, with her hovering over him. Like I think there should be some sort of, well, according to the Buenian, it's like that one-to-one with the father-son should have some existence without having the mother always there hovering. Like the mother should have a one-to-one time, the father should have a one-to-one time, to try to have that differentiation where it's not just the mother's always there hovering every time there's an issue. And that leads to Deborah fusing, and she's upset about her expectation differences, because her expectations is perfection that she's projecting onto the son, which is the family projection process. So she's projecting the perfectionism, and what she must do is she has to differentiate that her son isn't her. He doesn't need to be perfect like she wants him to be, and that she needs to relearn him. She needs to relearn, because right now she's learning them through her projections. Like she's having these illusions of who they are rather than really learning their differences. That's why she raises her voices whenever there's a problem, because she's mad that she believes that they're disloyal, that they're not copying her emotions, that they have differences, and she doesn't like that they have differences. Now, George, he's fused with the family anxiety, and he copes by cutting off. So every time there's anxiety happening, he just absorbs all that anxiety and can't distance himself from that anxiety. He can't disconnect from the emotions. And so the only way for him to disconnect from those emotions, he just cuts off from them. And so he needs to break that triangle by trying to reconnect with his son one-to-one. Tries to learn there might be something deeper happening there with his son. His son's only 10, but maybe some alone time which him and his son might be able to try to get some more understanding of who his son really is as his son's growing up. And there might be more reason why his son is having issues. Now, Matthew's functioning as the symptom bearer, where he's absorbing, oh, he's the problem, oh, he's a disaster. And so he's absorbing all the anxiety issues that the mother might have. So the mother has anxiety, and then she blames it on him. And that he's unable to differentiate himself from his mother's perfectionism. So he's unable to really, he's only 10 years old. So he has less ability than an adult because he's much younger. And so he has less ability to differentiate himself from his mother. And he seems to be copying his father's avoidance. And it's what I call DDoS, which is it's different in cybersecurity. But DDoS is a disabling of differentiation of self. So that extra D is disabling. So his differentiation of self is being disabled by his mother. And that differentiation of self is also being disabled with the father, because the father can't be himself when the mother's around because she starts raising her voice, and then that's disabled and he just runs away. So the son learns that, and so he cries, possibly because he can't run away from her. So he cries, and maybe he has learned, oh, I can run away by sleeping or crying. So it's his own way of avoiding the problem. And there's a concept of how when people start getting schizophrenic, there's like these double binds, and that we haven't really met who they really are. So I think what has to happen is the mother and the father haven't really met who Matthew is. Right now, he's functionally like, okay, just do homework, just do homework, just do homework, and they haven't really... I could be getting this wrong. I mean, this is a simplified case. But they haven't really differentiated him as his solo communicator of who he really is as a person. And they haven't really explored his whys. All right, next up is solution-focused brief therapy. This is an application of SFBT to this case, where it's trying to shift to future focus, solution focus, away from the past problems. It's very simplified. It's exception finding. It's identify and emphasize the strengths. It's scaling question. Log and explore each day's rating. So it's like, was today better with the sun? Was today worse with the sun? So 4 to 5 days of the week, it was better. Oh no, it was worse. 4 to 5 days of the week, it was not that good. So how does it happen on the other days that it's better? How do we copy those good days? So what helped number go up? What hindered the number from going up? And so it's trying to experiment with different incremental steps. So exploring each member's steps to get to their miracle routine. So it's not only just asking the mother what her miracle would be asking the father what his preferred miracle would be, and the son, what would he want, how would he want to do his homework, right? So, because it doesn't seem like this is more of reality therapy, but it doesn't seem like these family members are negotiating. So it's trying to learn where they're at and figuring out how to get them to the future that they're trying to get to. So it's less abstract and more just concrete charting, numbers going up, numbers going down, trying to identify and emphasize strengths. So the next case application example with narrative therapy would apply to this case by understanding it's a very problem-saturated story, because they are discussing Matthew as oversensitive and a disaster, not really talking about any of the good parts of the story. They're mainly just talking about, oh, the problem that, oh, he runs away and he cries and she escalates, and they're only talking about the problems rather than the tools and the options that are at their disposal or that they have tried already. So it's about trying to map the problem's influences and their stories to try to figure out, okay, what have they tried before? How will that go? What do they feel about that? And then trying to map out what each say according to their own worldview. And so that's why it's good to get each one of them alone, one-to-one, to be able to hear their story without having it really influenced by the other family member. It's more of getting that person's individualized story and why they're doing what they're doing, and I'll try to understand and build a rapport with them to understand that maybe they are not externalizing the problem from Matthew, that maybe I have to reframe the problem with them. And a possible reframing is that they're all dealing with overwhelming feelings, and that this is like a temptation they get, or that this is an enemy that they're fighting. That the overwhelming feelings that whenever the son is overwhelmed, he cries, he falls asleep, he's tired. Whenever the mother's overwhelmed, she will then start lashing out in yelling or at least raising her voice, or she might escalate things further to the point where the father wants to run away because he gets overwhelmed with her getting overwhelmed. So it's almost cyclical, where something happens with the son can affect the father through the mother, because it's all kind of, they're wrapped up together in this storyline of them all not being able to defeat the overwhelming feelings. And so it's about trying to understand, okay, are there any times when it was different? Are there any unique outcomes where, even though there's 4 to 5 days of it not being good, they can try to figure out on the days that it is good, can they tell the story on how that day goes, and to try to promote more of the good days and try to discuss together about how to deal with what influences them that gets them to be overwhelmed, and then trying to figure out what weapons do they have to combat this overwhelming feelings. So maybe it can be going for a walk together, or maybe taking a break or watching a movie, or some sort of way to add more enriching narratives and storyline that, oh, they've tried this, tried that. It's an experiment together for them to make their own story what they want. They're Neo in the Matrix. They can change the simulation in their life. If they believe they can do it, then they have a higher chance of doing it. If they believe that they'll do great things, they become the story they tell themselves. That's a very common narrative therapy thing. So to tell them, hey, if they believe them themselves more, that they can overcome these overwhelming feelings, that they might have a higher chance, more likely to discover the available options that they can include into their life story. Now, next is to reauthor the members as capable of reaching success, because if they're writing themselves as, oh, they can't overcome this, or that he just has to run away to another room, or she has to raise her voice and escalate, or that he has to cry, well, let's reauthor the story that they're all dealing with something that they could overcome, that they can defeat this overwhelming monster of their feelings. They can try to figure out what weapons do they use that are leading to more unique outcomes that they can try to take note of in their story, and say, hey, let's tell that story more often, the story that helps them get to the outcomes that they would prefer. And even with small successes, it's good to help encourage that narrative and encourage their strengths, to have each individual be a hero in their story. And then the next up is references. This has to deal with Etchinson and Kleiss in 2000 for narrative therapy, Kerr and Bowen, which is the standard Bowenian reference, and Kim, 2008, who is a solution-focused brief therapy. But thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.